So to get us started, I have a quick question that anybody can chime in on. I wanted to talk about indigenous lessons and how those can be integrated into a Western approach a little bit, because we're here in the West. I was just thinking about, as Hanareia was talking about personhood for rivers. We have personhood for corporations, but we're not. We're kind of in a different position in terms of the approach. So I wanted advice, I guess, about how to integrate these teachings. How do you see these worlds meeting?
I do it every day. I live in two worlds. Yes, they are two different worlds, but because I am one, then they become one within me. And so there is no reason why we cannot have the outcome that you're looking for in terms of the two knowledge systems coming together. A lot of people think that they don't complement each other, and in a lot of ways they really do. I don't know if you're looking for like specific answers to potentially do it. I'm just saying that it is possible, and I think between our two people at least, we are seeing things that aren't working well, but there are things that do really work well together as well. I don't know if you wanted.
I think for too long there's been this implication that indigenous ways of knowing were somehow superstitious and unscientific, when knowledges of an ecosystem are built up peer-reviewed observations over generations, and maybe the difference is that in that worldview, the unseen, the world of spirit, has validity that Western science is just now starting to grapple with, in fields like quantum physics. And I think, realizing that, things that our elders have been saying, that all life is connected, everything is interconnected, and then they're like, oh, we've got a particle here and a particle over there, and we stimulate this one, and we have no way of explaining exactly why is this one behaving when this one's being stimulated, and things like that. There's so much that we don't know, that we think, the arrogance, unfortunately, of sometimes the Western scientific view assumes that, with a little bit of data and information, you've got the full picture. And so, that the sense of awe and wonder that was talked about in earlier presentations, I think if we all remember that, and we're seeing now too that especially in this era of climate change, that scientists are now open to working with like Inuit elders who have extensive knowledge and observation about the changes taking place in the region they live, and so there's opportunities for collaboration. And I would just say to everyone, if you really want to delve philosophically about this, you should check out John Trudell. If you've never heard of him, there's a PBS documentary about him called Trudell, and you can find tons of YouTube videos. But he really talks about the essence of us all as human beings coming from tribes at some point, and that we all are made up of the metals and minerals and salts of the earth that comprise, other speakers spoke that, the amazing fact that we're made of ancient stardust. That connects all of us. The air that we're sharing and breathing connects all of us even more than any differences of nationality, ethnicity, gender, or anything does.
This is an interesting angle on the topics you were sharing. The question comes: what ideas do you have for reconnecting people with their food? That's something we think a lot about here at FIPS, and it is a big part of culture as you're engaging. Any thoughts on that? Stumped them. No.
It depends if you want to call it food as well.
Yeah.
Food is a term that we associate, like we can eat this thing and this thing is just going to be eaten a lot of the time. And like how Will was saying, when we're eating that grape, You have to think back to where that grape has come from and where that grape is going. And so for a lot of people, food is just that instant thing that happens. And so at least back home where I'm from, just being part of nature and learning where our natural food sources come from, the resources that we use to make those journeys, to whether we're catching fruit like birds or we're going out and diving into our oceans. I think just getting out there, well, at least for us, it's getting out there and being part of it. That's how we pretty much connect. And that's just it's a thing that happens. It's not a thing we question. It's not a thing like you can think about it, but really we are one with them. And so we know that we can go say hello. And we just ask them, like, can we please take this to be sustenance for ourselves? And in return, we will look after you so that you are there for the next generation of yourselves. Yeah.
I think it's a really crucial question, isn't it? I mean, we ask little kids, like, where does hamburger come from? And they would say McDonald's or the Giant Eagle grocery store or something. Life lives off of other life. And if not for the fact that this was just an existential condition of being here at all, it would be horrific. It would be horrific. But because our very being depends on the gift of the life of other beings. And we often don't even think about this, and we gobble down the next fast food bite that we come to. It's no accident that meals have traditionally been a sacrament, because in that moment you realize that your very being is dependent on something that's infinitely deeper and wilder and vaster than your supposedly separate self. And when you realize that, you live differently.
So our farm project was an evolution from a community effort that was started in about 2013 called Food is Our Medicine. And what we realized was that the health problems in our community of diabetes and obesity and high blood pressure were caused by the significant changes in diet in the last 50 years in particular, as we gravitated more and more to the standard American diet. And for so many indigenous people, our ancestors co-evolved with what their foods were, and when that changes dramatically in the simple carbohydrates and sugars and all the processed stuff that is become the norm, it's not really so good for us. And so it's like we had a public health crisis that had to be addressed. And though there were the remnants of traditional food practices in the Longhouse of making corn soup, and which is a very labor-intensive process of making hominy from scratch, and nixtamalizing it in wood ash and rinsing it, and it takes a lot of work. So compare that to popping something in the microwave for a minute, and it's a huge difference. But that was the impetus for us to really take a hard look at what was going on with and our relationship with food.
Yeah. Here's another one. Are youth in your communities engaged in and excited about learning the culture and history of your people? And how do you connect with them?
I still fit into the youth category. At least within my people. I still haven't taken the next step to get out of that category. But at least a lot of my cousins, and for me, cousins mean pretty much everyone that's related to me, we are interested and engaged because we have seen the years before us be deprived of being their accessibility to our environments and to our sacred places and things like that. a lot of us are becoming environmental warriors for our people. Or even just me being here and speaking to you all about how we see the world. That is a way that we are being active. We're also becoming educated in the Western system, so we can again use the system that has been forced upon us. So I think a lot of us are getting out there. It is different typically for urban natives for us. They are disconnected typically from their homelands, from where they come from. And so it's trying to connect them back as well, because many of them do feel that loss of connection. And as you saw from my presentation, that we are all connected, and if you're lost in that world, then you don't feel a sense of self and your modi is diminished. And so those of us who are fortunate to live at home and to be connected as a youth person, we are trying to reach out to the rest of us because we're all important and need to be a part of the decision making. So yeah, just trying to be leaders in any way and form we can.
Yeah, I'd concur. We have a similar issue with the urbanization of our population. And, less than half of our citizens live on our territories and live in the city of Buffalo, Rochester, Erie, Pennsylvania, and all across different places. For the kids living on territory, they're very fortunate that it's still a very rural area. Outdoor activities are just still very much the norm. Fishing, hunting, going out looking for eagle feathers. You see kids riding around on ATVs, going into the backwoods all the time, and maybe they're going back to party. Some of them, but for quite a few, they are very much interested in outdoor recreation. And so there's a concerted effort too from our conservation department to engage. There's after school programs from the youngest up into high school that's age appropriate. And so unfortunately I myself, even in my past life as more engaged as an environmental educator, I got to be on the ground doing this kind of stuff. But nowadays I'm responsible for running the whole media operation for the Seneca Nation. So my little bit of contribution to the environment is just being a part of our watershed resources working group and working with our environmental protection department, our conservation department, our environmental health sanitarian. But we tried through our media work to highlight these positive stories, because that's really what our job is to hold a mirror up and say, for too long people talk about the dysfunctions in our communities, and we want to hold up the athletes and the artists and the ones who are achieving great things and say, this is who you are. And that's really, the opportunity to tell stories from our perspective. It's a great honor, and I'm really thankful that the timing worked out as I was finishing grad school, that people within the nation wanted to start a media endeavor, and they said, hey, haven't you been making films for like 20 years?
Just very briefly, with great reverence and appreciation for indigenous wisdom, which I'm glad we're finally in dialogue with. I also just want to say we're all indigenous earthlings. That we beings are beings of the humus. Human beings are beings of the earth, and stuff like FIPS is doing is reaching the young folks around here in really beautiful ways.
Well, thank you. I think that when Hanareia, when you mentioned the personhood of the river, it was like a magic trick. It happened in the room a little bit. People were really kind of amazed. And one question that came up: were there other political obstacles that you had to overcome to get that passed? And what were they, and how did you overcome them?
So I personally did not do the legal work or anything. I'm just speaking on behalf of the people that have been able to be successful in that. They were multi-decade projects. They didn't just happen overnight. They didn't happen in a year. It was a lot of personal will and trying to bring this to people's attention. And then Fortunately, we were able to get people through the educational system so that they could learn the different systems we had to do. And then depending on who was in a government, whether they would listen or not. So there were a lot of obstacles to everything that was done. But once the first act went in, then we're like, well, if they're doing it, then, you should do it for the rest of us. We have other significant landmarks that are going to be becoming humans, pretty much people. One of my mountains is going to be one, which is going to be awesome. They are also doing this here in Turtle Island as well. Just wanted to mention that. They have been successful out west for different things. So I think a lot of us are starting to see that if you can all see what we see, then we're all better off for it. But there's plenty of obstacles depending on the situation at the time. Yeah.
And I should point out that in Pennsylvania, there have been these efforts towards the rights of nature, the legal rights of nature, and there's one community, I forget the name of it, but in response to the push for fracking to happen there. So I think there's a new documentary coming out from Public Herald called The Invisible Hand, and should stay tuned for that, because I saw an early version of it and gave the filmmakers some feedback, and it deals a lot with the legal rights of nature, efforts that are going on around the world, and then contextualizing it to right here and stuff that people are doing in Pennsylvania.
This is one about the human role in the environment. Environmental pioneer Howard Zonisser once said, "Let us be guardians, not gardeners." As we gather here in this garden setting today, is it our role to be guardians or stewards of the planet, or do you see it as more complex than that? Open to anyone.
I would say yes and no. I think we've gone awry thinking that we are elevated above the rest of nature, so it's just up to us to be the guardian. That I think it's really important to realize there's a deeper guardian, that we're a participant in and a manifestation of. Life. I was going to share this quote from Dogen, a great Zen teacher. He says, "Life makes me what I am. I make life what it is." So to go back to our humble origins, our human nature, is to appreciate that we are these participants in something vast and deep that's a great mystery. And yet, because we're not separate, the life of others turns on our response. So our life turns on others' responses, but their life turns on our responses. And this is an awesome responsibility. It actually makes me tremble, because that's what we're called to do. We can't, on our own, take care of the rest of nature. But there's no such thing as being on our own. So we offer the best we can and hope that the gifts ripple out. So I think we have an immense responsibility, but situated in a way deeper context than us being the guardians.
So the way I look at it is we're all of the above, and because, so like I was talking about with the Thanksgiving address, we tend to see from an indigenous framework that we have responsibilities to the world and to each other rather than rights. This is it kind of exemplified in bringing it back to Columbus. There were papal bulls that were issued, not long after, that basically said that different European monarchies had the right to lay claim to lands that belonged to non-Christian people because they were considered to be non-humans, and therefore it was vacant land, terra nullis, and they called it. And these papal bulls still, and the doctrine of Christian discovery that emerged from that are still used as the legal justification at the Supreme Court level in the United States and Canada to justify the taking of indigenous lands in violation of treaties, and basically continuing to let the process of colonization continue on in the 21st century. Gardener has often been seen as a apt metaphor to the way we lived with the forest, because we didn't exist and just not touch or modify anything. We did prescribed burns that were beneficial to habitat that in turn fed us. And people look at the Amazon rainforest and they say, oh, this wild wilderness, not realizing that it's a constructed landscape that human intervention has worked with nature to make it flourish. And so, I personally see the role of as much. I see what you're saying. That there's a limitation sometimes too to these concepts, and then also we need to be mindful of do these terminologies, what relationship do they put us in with the wider world, and because. Sometimes too, when we try to translate concepts across languages, and things have certain connotations in English. Like I talked about, prayer has connotation of asking for something. Though for many of you, you see what I did as a prayer, and that's okay. It's fine. There's these nuances to language, but we just have to think about it and unpack these terminologies.
Hanareia, I have a question for you. And forgive me if I mispronounce anything here. Are you familiar with Tuhoe, the living building of the people of Tuhoe?
Oh, yes.
Okay. And you, what impact has that had? Have you seen?
Well, I was there fairly recently, which was amazing. Te Whare o Tuhoe is Tuhoe regaining their sovereignty on their land that they connect to. It is a wonderful building that I think is setting the eco standards to the highest level in New Zealand, which has been great to be here as well, knowing that we have a similar goal. For them, they wanted it to be sustainable for the next 100 generations of people. So for them to make it a very green space, but also be able to facilitate all of their things that they want to do with their communities, it is a very welcome site. It is also it's a hub for their people because many of them live in those forests, so they're not always necessarily connected. So it's a way to bring them back together. For us, whare do that. For buildings, bring us together. And you don't need lots of buildings to do that. So they only have one very large building to put all their people in. But yeah, no, it's a wonderful building. Everyone should definitely look it up. It's setting the standards for not only Māori, but for everyone else in our country to kind of follow on.
It's fantastic. One for Dr. Corwin. What changes have been observed from reintroducing the buffalo?
And there's such an excitement around this project, and a sense of pride, and it's just this invigorating attitude within the community, and I think it resonated outward because with our media work, we have a Facebook page, and we post a video to there, and oftentimes we'll get about 10,000 views as it goes around our community and some of our other Haudenosaunee communities, among the other 6 nations, and the general public, non-natives, view them as well. We have a YouTube channel, and we put videos there so that the elders that do have internet access but don't do social media can see it. So we may put the same video on there, and it has like 60 views. And it had 10,000 on Facebook. But the video that we made about the first bison that was harvested, and it, one of the farm crew members sings a song of thanksgiving for it after it's been slaughtered. This video has gone viral around the world and is almost at 2 million views. So we have all these videos, they're like 60, 75 views, 1.7 million. And so, I think that too would just like, people had no idea and wow, this is really great. The not only do we feel good about this here in our community, but the rest of the world does too.
Yeah. Relatedly, do you have any suggestions on how we can help to stand against petrochemicals?
Oh, this is a major topic that I talk about all the time when I speak at colleges and universities, and it's really, we all gotta examine our lives and how are we using energy and material objects. I mean, it's pervasive around us. This is modern civilization. You can be in remote places of the Amazon and in Africa and in Alaska, and you will find plastic. And so we just need to really see what is it that we really need? How can we be sensible about what we're using? How can we transition and push for renewable energy to be the norm? And we know it's economics, that there's incredible subsidies for the fossil fuel industry, and that the politicians that have been running the U.S. and Canada and most any other colonial country have their hands deep in the petrochemical industry. So we're pushing a rock up against a mountain, but if we as a species can put people onto the moon, there's absolutely no reason that we can't figure out distribution and energy grids. They always say, oh, that's not feasible. The sun only shines during the day and the windmills are over here. And, oh, we have problems. That's just, an excuse. So in every possible way that we can take accountability and responsibility in our own lives, hold corporations accountable and politicians accountable, and to really support and encourage young people that are doing amazing things in engineering programs and startup companies that are trying to find solutions. The fact that people have come up with ways to make cement where it's actually a carbon sink rather than being one of the most carbon intensive industries and adding the greenhouse effect. People have come up with ways to where it can absorb carbon. So we're smart enough monkeys. We can totally do this.
Agreed. Well, thanks to all of you. If we could have another round of applause for our speakers.